So, I'm going to call it right now and say that the Pac-12 conference has officially collapsed. By this point in 2024, there's only going to be 4 teams left, originally out of 12. The exodus started over a year ago when UCLA and USC announced they were leaving the conference for the Big Ten, citing the fact that the Pac-12 had yet to negotiate a new media rights deal after 2024, and the fact that both athletic departments were burning through cash, with UCLA saying that they were about to cut sports due to funding. Reaction from Big Ten fans initially was sort of like, this is insane. How are you going to logistically do this, and can you really put student athletes on planes for 12 hours a week during the school year? So then fast forward to a couple weeks ago, and Colorado, with their new coach Deion Sanders, announced that they're going to be leaving the Pac-12 and returning to the Big 12, where they were members about 12 to 13 years ago. And then fast forward again to last week, where you have Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State announcing that they're leaving for the Big 12 as well. And then you fast forward to a couple days ago, and Washington and Oregon have confirmed rumors that they're moving from the Pac-12 to the Big 10, like USC and UCLA. This means that on July 1st, 2024, Stanford, Cal Berkeley, Washington State, and Oregon State will be the last schools remaining in the Pac-12, and I would not be surprised if that wasn't the case by then. So in this video, I thought we would hit pause on all of the chaos and break down why are all these schools fleeing away from the Pac-12 conference, and also break down what some of the consequences are. Like for instance, we have no idea of what's going to happen to the Rose Bowl from now on. So this whole ordeal with the Pac-12 actually dates back to 2009, when they hired the new commissioner, Larry Scott. Now, Scott was criticized for a lot of things, but early on, he was considered vastly overpaid at $5.3 million per year, and he was considered severely underqualified, having been some sort of high-level guy at the Women's Tennis Association. But more specifically, he had no direct experience with college athletics, which would really come to hurt him as college sports grew and developed throughout his tenure. So Larry Scott's first move as commissioner was to bring in Utah and Colorado to make the Pac-10 the Pac-12. And then his first significant move after that was to negotiate a new media rights deal, which he ended up negotiating with ESPN. And this turned out to be a pretty bad deal because it relegated all of the conference's games to late at night, which would be watched by only West Coast audiences. So they automatically eliminated 2/3 of the country, and then on top of that, the West Coast is known to be a notoriously bad media market because it's the West Coast. You have mountains, you have beaches, you have cool weather. People don't stay inside and watch television on the West Coast. That's just not a thing. This really decreased the visibility of the member schools, and they really didn't like that. So Larry Scott's solution to this was to do what several other conferences had done and to produce a conference-wide network that you and I now know as the Pac-12 network. And when they first started building this, they tried to negotiate with a lot of different networks, but they couldn't find anybody to partner with. For example, arguably the most successful conference network is the Big Ten network, and they're 50% owned by Fox. And then you have the SEC and the ACC networks, which are 100% owned by ESPN. So clearly having someone with broadcast experience and a larger corporation that can support you financially is really important to the success of these regional networks. So eventually the Pac-12 network got ESPN to come to the table and say, hey, we'll be equal partners with you in this network. We'll split it with you 50-50. And Larry Scott's response to that was, no. For what I can only imagine was greed. So in 2012, the Pac-12 network launched with no media partners, and it was the only conference network on television that was 100% owned by the conference. No broadcast expertise, and no larger corporation to support them. So as a result of this, and being a West Coast only network, this led to pretty terrible ratings for the Pac-12, and also they battled and struggled to maintain sponsorships. So in addition to negotiating terrible deals, Larry Scott was also criticized for his inability to curb costs. For example, he moved the conference's headquarters to a high-rise in San Francisco that over the course of 11 years cost the conference $92 million in rent, which you and I would see as outrageous and was vastly above what other conferences were allegedly paying over that time. So after a terrible deal with ESPN, a disaster in the Pac-12 network, and the inability to have any grasp on costs, the Pac-12 more or less booted Scott out in 2021, a year before his contract was up. That was how desperate they were. And unfortunately for the Pac-12, they made the same exact mistake they made with Larry Scott again, bringing in somebody with no connections to the member schools and had no experience in college sports. They ended up hiring a guy named David Clyakov, who most recently was the president of sports and entertainment at MGM International. What that has to do with college sports, I don't know. But before that, he was an executive vice president at NBC Universal, and before that, he was a vice president at MLB Media. But despite his experience, he still really did not have the contacts necessary to negotiate a better media rights deal, which clearly was the Pac-12's number one concern. And worse than that, for Clyakov, he came in right when NIL deals were becoming a thing. And rather than double down on name, image, and likeness, getting regulations and guidelines around that, or doubling down on getting a media rights deal negotiated, he decided to focus on this strategic alliance between the Pac-12 and the Big Ten to shore up non-conference play, guarantee televised games on the East Coast, Midwest, and whatnot. And this was criticized for a couple of reasons. The biggest one being that he had no formal agreement signed, and two, because there was no formal agreement, he had no way to prevent member schools of the Pac-12 from defecting to the Big Ten. So after Clyakov had been commissioner for less than a year, USC and UCLA decided, we're not going down with the boat, we're jumping ship, we're going to the Big Ten, where they were welcomed with open arms, which was kind of shocking to me, but hey, at the end of the day, it's all about money. And in my opinion, this was really the end of the Pac-12 conference. There's just no way, without the LA market, that Clyakov could have gone into the offices of these major networks and negotiated a media rights deal that was going to make the rest of the member schools happy. Now at this point, it seemed like the rest of the member schools were still holding out, hoping for a better media rights deal, but considering the layoffs at ESPN, considering the fact they didn't have the LA market anymore, things were not looking good. And to make matters even worse, Clyakov had more or less completely disappeared from the public eye. He wasn't making any public comments, and deflecting the media is one thing, but to completely shy away from them altogether, that's not good. That's not something you want to see in your leader. So this ultimately led 6 of the remaining 10 schools to find any way out. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 6 months to a year, we hear that Stanford and Cal Berkeley have joined the Big 12, and Oregon State and Washington State have joined the Mountain West Conference, or maybe the Big 10, ending the Pac-12. So it's unfortunate to see this happening, but money in college sports is not like what it used to be. Okay, these schools get tens, if not hundreds, of millions of dollars just off these media rights deals. Coaches, athletic directors, they get paid nominally more than they ever have been before. Why? To negotiate deals like the Big Ten just did, who agreed to a 7-year deal worth $7 billion. That's $1 billion a year. And each school that's in the Big Ten is guaranteed $80 to $100 million every single season, regardless of postseason play. That's before postseason play. Now, these deals are very complicated and involve all of the networks, not just one or two. And now, in the most recent negotiations, the Big Ten said they did reach out to Apple and Amazon and were, I guess, somewhat talking to them, but they ultimately passed. But I would confidently say that this is the last time that streaming sits on the sidelines when negotiating a college sports media rights deal. And one of the biggest things I would stress about the Big Ten adding these West Coast teams is that from 10 a.m. to midnight, they can own every single slot on Saturday. What other conference can go up to a network and say, if you make a deal with us, you will own every single time slot on Saturday? There's just not many conferences that can say that, and definitely not many with as caliber of teams. Folks, it's the NFL, NBA, college sports. That's the sports hierarchy in this country. And I think being third is not something to take lightly. Okay, NBA players get paid hundreds of millions of dollars, NFL players tens of millions, and college athletes are starting to get up there. These NIL deals that they're signing are now worth 7 figures. The top college athletes now are signing NIL deals worth millions of dollars. And it's not slowing down. Yes, college sports is supposed to be about providing an opportunity for college athletes to compete and develop valuable life skills. But at this point, athletic directors are basically having to brace themselves up against the door to stop money from flowing in. And colleges can't say no. They want nice things, their alumni want nice things, and their alumni want to win. And for most colleges, the alumni base is the revenue stream they have the most control over, and so they have to make them happy. Now, I'm not saying that keeping the failing Pac-12 alive was the best thing for student athletes. I mean, UCLA was talking about cutting sports because they didn't have the funding. But then again, I don't think that putting college athletes on a plane 12 hours a week during the school year is the best thing for them either. Now, in reading about the Big Ten media rights deal, ESPN reportedly did not accept what the Big Ten was offering, but I want to talk about Disney in a separate video further down the line, but preview, it was a mistake. So I know I said I wanted to speculate about the Rose Bowl and some other consequences of this, but I think we've run out of time for this video. So, with that said, I hope this was an interesting elaboration on this topic. Thank you for watching.